Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Free Assange Vigil number for week 42. It is 27 days until the beginning of the second round of Julian Assange's extradition hearing. Today marks 3,423 days since the beginning of the illegal and arbitrary detention of the WikiLeaks founder. $4.2 billion IMF loan to Ecuador. 1,053 days since Reality Winner was taken into federal custody for leaking information. And on the bright side, 40 days since Chelsea Manning was released after the 10-year-long WikiLeaks grand jury was dismissed. I am joined this evening by my co-host, Andrew Smith. We have as a guest co-host this evening, both Kendra from the Denver Action for Assange and Misty, Sarcasm Stardust herself. Our guests tonight are Ray McGovern and Elizabeth Voss. Ray, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. And yourself?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm hanging in there. What happened to Liz? There. So, Andrew, while we get started, you wanted to mention the new call to action.
Yeah, so every week now, what I'm going to do is post on our website a different action that people can take. And I'll put that in the chat here, too, as I wrap up talking about it. But this week we have a handful of different petitions between the EU, the US, Amnesty International, and then other initiatives that we've talked about, like banning facial recognition. And then we also have the members of the Senate that signed a letter asking for Ecuador to remove Julian's political asylum. So we have all of their Twitter handles as well as their local congressional office phone numbers listed in there for the people to reach out to on social media and educate them, share information about Julian's situation with them. We ask you be polite. But if you're so bold, you can also, at this point in time, call and leave them voicemails as well at their local offices. So I just dropped that link in chat for everyone. And then each vigil, so 3 times a week, we're going to be having different actions that everybody can take as we have the vigil going on.
Well, let's dive into it, because we've heard throughout the time we've been running these vigils from a number of different guests that if Julian Assange were to be extradited to the US, he would be facing what are called SAMs, Special Administrative Measures. And these measures are designed to break a human being to the point to where they don't come back. That's about as clear as I can make it. They're punitive by design and they're torturous by design. Stella Morris, who had to cut the UK court system and the media off at the head and get out in front of revealing to the world who she was, Julian Assange's partner, mother of his 2 young children. She joined Twitter last week, and she put up a link to a paper that has been written about SAMs, and we're going to go through that tonight. I can't think of 2 better people to have on a guest panel to do this than Ray and Elizabeth. So while it is incredibly heavy material, I think it's going to be a hell of a vigil tonight. Can we pull the graphic, please, Josh? And just kind of go over that, because it is the bullet pointed breakdown of what the SAMs are. Okay. Oh, that's a different one than what I have up. Well, here, let me just break down in bullet point form what they are, and then we can kind of go around and discuss it. SAMs can be imposed before, during, or after a trial. They prohibit prisoners who live under them from contact or communication with all but a handful of approved individuals. So those individuals can lose approval at the whim of the facility where the person's being held. They can impose a second gag order on the few individuals who are allowed contact with the inmate. That includes lawyers, friends, and family. SAMs prohibit defendants and attorneys and their families from communicating about what special administrative measures are, not only to everyone in the public, but to each other. They can also be used to prevent or impede access to family, friends, legal counsel, and prohibit information from external sources, including media, phone calls, and the internet. They create an isolation that is even more extreme than solitary confinement and essentially render prisoners either physically and or mentally unfit to stand trial. They can be used to enforce draconian conditions like mandatory strip searches for already secure prisoners. And they can be imposed for up to a year without requiring a review. Take it away, anyone.
It really is solitary confinement on steroids. It's insane. Truth be told, before today I started kind of prepping for the shows, I kind of knew, the gist of what these measures were, but it's ridiculously intense. You can't, you're lucky if you get a 15-minute phone call every month to one approved family member. It's intense. It is complete shut off from the outside world. And that is psychological torture. I mean, I think this isn't it 15 days that it's anything past that is considered torture. And this can go on for a year without a review. And it's insane how intense it is. It really is.
I agree. I think it's a complete abusive process. And here's a question for our guests. I'm wondering, can you guys think of any situation really that would justify these type of measures? I can't. I mean, I know I can't.
I can't either. I can't. Not be able to. Speak to an attorney and not be able to participate in your own defense. And that kind of goes against everything we're supposed to stand for. Our justice system is supposed to be about being able to defend yourself, and you can't even have conversations with your lawyers in private without being recorded and spied on by the FBI. And it's nuts. That's insane.
Yeah, I would add that in my view, it's barbaric. Human beings don't do these kinds of things to other human beings. That's been clear for centuries. And to see us revert back to those, the definition is cruel, inhumane, torturous practices. It just defies the imagination that the media and the people who are supposedly in charge of civilized countries can condone this. And I suppose the reason they can condone it is because, at least in our country, nobody knows about it. Nobody has heard word one about Julian Assange for almost a month now. And all these things are going down and being completely suppressed in the media. And there are still too few people who look to the fifth estate, namely us, to get information. So it's a very sad sort of thing, but it's so cruel and so inhuman and so unhumane that, my God, if we can't prick the consciences of civilized people about this, and now, what hope is there for us? So I think what we need to do is make sure that we can imagine ways that have not come to our imaginations yet, and figure out ways to get this up and out and tell the normal person in the street, look, do you want to be part of this? Do you want to be part of these complete prescinding from legal standards, 800 years of tradition after the Magna Carta, habeas corpus, the right to have an attorney and speak to him or her confidentially? The abuses are so egregious that they should be able to be pointed out and have an effect. Now, people say, Why are they being so blatant? Well, in my view, this is all a kind of instruction. This is a warning to anybody who wants to try to do what Julian Assange has done very courageously. This is what's going to happen to you. And so when they drag them out unceremoniously from the Ecuadorian embassy, when they treat him like, well, I won't even say the word in court, behind a kind of a cage, and then, you know, what's in store for him if we don't get our act together? It's, you know, it's just to edify people. This is what we can do to you, and this is what we will do to you if you go the path that Julian did. And that's why all our journalists who feed at the government trough are so afraid. That's why they won't say one word about Julian, and why worse still, people like The Guardian and New York Times turn on him and betray him, even though he's the epitome of their profession as a professional journalist.
I think that's so true. And I also was thinking that, you know, even, you know, that's kind of one of the things that you see in the media, or that people will dismiss what's going on with Julian Assange, just that, well, he just needs to come to the US and face justice. And it's so clear. I mean, I think if you took Assange out of the picture and just explained to somebody what these measures are, what these special administrative measures are, a lot of people might not even believe that that goes on in the US.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think a lot of people are failing to see that it's been like kind of a progressive, this isn't just about Julian, this is about like a slow chipping away of, you know, the rights that we have. And I mean, it even with just these measures, when they were first introduced, it was to keep people who, supposedly, it was to keep people who, you know, could maybe have connections on the outside to cause violence or harm or a terrorist attack or whatever. That was their, you know, the initial intent behind it. And then after 9/11, it seemed like it exploded, and they're using it more and more. And that's terrifying to me, that, you know, it's what everybody always says, first they came for whoever. And I didn't say anything. And I mean, coming for Assange, any independent journalist, or journalist period, but especially independent journalists who's not talking about this, is doing themselves a huge disservice, because they're coming for you next. It's going to keep snowballing.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that collectively we've been talking for a long time about the type of injustice that Julian would face if he came to the US. I mean, we had, you know, people like John Kiriakou who've been talking for years about the type of injustice that happens in the Eastern District of Virginia. But now to have the specific measures laid out like that in that PDF that Stella shared is really helpful, because it gives us some specific terms to talk about. And it shows, like you said, the gravity, the extremity of it in, you know, black and white in specificity. So.
Let's let's go over a little bit of this. We had that first card up a minute or so ago, and if we could just kind of go back to it real quick and touch on the second paragraph. Okay, the U.S. Attorney General, so William freaking Barr, has sole discretion to impose SAMs. A prisoner lacks the most basic procedural protections to allow him to contest the SAM designation. Prisoners may be left in the dark as to why they've been subjected to the SAMs in the first place, although in Julian's case, I'm pretty sure they've made that shatteringly clear. Many prisoners remain under these conditions indefinitely for years or even decades, and court challenges are difficult. So all of these things amount to, like Ray said it perfectly, it's barbarism. How can we effectively convey to the public at large that this is going on? Liz? You've been trying for a long ass time. I know that. What have you found to be effective?
Well, I think what you're doing right now is effective. I think that sharing independent media articles, like a really good source right now would be the World Socialist website. They do a fantastic job covering Julian Assange and the case against him, and they've been doing that for years. So anytime you see a good article, or recently the one by Shadowproof reviewing the current situation, any of those outlets that publish something, share it as widely as you can. I mean, in the simplest terms, that would be the way to go. Right, a few years ago, I would have said get out in the street. Right now, that's kind of not really possible for most people. So right now, I think that the best thing you can do is share accurate information as widely as you possibly can.
Yeah, as usual, I agree with Elizabeth. I would cite the best source as Niels Melzer. We know that he has really kind of done the research. You know that he went to Sweden. You know that he's fluent in Swedish. You know that he found that those charges on those police blotters in Stockholm were forged. They were either forged or unsigned. So everyone thinks, and this is a very effective covert action technique to smear people, everyone thinks in this country that Julian Assange has something to do with rape. Now, that still is a pretty tough rap, right? And for somebody who had nothing to do with rape, to have this in the consciousness of, I'd say, 90% of the American people. Yeah, but he's a rapist, isn't he? I mean, what we need to do is say, well, look, the UN rapporteur for torture was reluctant to get into the case of Julian Assange because he thought he was a rapist. Pure and simple. And when he finally looked into it and pursued all these charges about how Julian conducted himself in the embassy and all that stuff, he found out that it just wasn't true. And he comments, Melzer does. He says, I was fooled by all the propaganda. The UN rapporteur for torture. And he goes in and he picks the whole thing apart. And in an interview, 2 interviews, he shows how the Swedes falsified everything. At whose behest? Oh, come on. That's a no-brainer. It's an old covert action technique, as I said before. So I think what we need to do is to say, look, the UN has a body that looks into these things. The same body and the same rapporteur, a different person, who looked into Chelsea Manning, Bradley Manning's torture. And now we have someone who's gone in reluctantly because he too was deceived by this propaganda. But then he saw what's going on. He talked to the people in the embassy, the honest ones, before they changed hands. And he found out there was all a bunch of lies, that Julian was not guilty of any of these charges. He didn't even torture his cat, if you can believe it, right? And he did flush the toilet. It's ridiculous, but this is what Americans remember. Now, the question has been raised already. How do we get that into the consciousness of Americans, given the fact that the mainstream media has just kind of caved on this, and worse than caved, betrayed Julian? How do we do it?
I think actually, to your point there, the situation that we're in right now with the COVID, and not to get into that too much, but I think there have been some overreaches that people are questioning, and I think now is always now is a good time, but that will give us an in a little bit, because some of that goes away. And to your point with Nils, I found too that article that he did in the Republic, it's so powerful, because he did, he was a person that admitted to, look, I was wrong about this. I was also, this is how I was thinking too. And I think that is also so powerful, because people have such a hard time being wrong. And I think that's also a part of propaganda, to cut off discourse, like, well, I have to be on the right side, even if that side switches tomorrow, I'm on the right side, Yeah.
Well, and I also think somebody that Caitlin Johnstone talks about that a lot, actually, and I'm really glad that you brought that up, Red, because I think that the biggest issue that we face is really narrative control, because our mainstream media is, it's all lies, and we have to battle that constantly every day. So I think that that's a huge part of the issue that we have in not just Julian's case, but in everything, is just trying to maintain narrative control.
Now, 9/11 was mentioned a little while ago, and as some of you know, I've written a piece a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it was already discussed, but the question to put to folks is, if WikiLeaks were up and running at full steam, if its workers were not totally distracted in trying to prevent Julian Assange from being sickened, or worse still, or taken to the United States, if people were generally conscious that, hey, there is a way to get this word out, what about all those people at the WHO? But what about all those people in the intelligence community? What about all the people in China that knew this was a really serious thing? Now, they didn't know it as early as November. I think we have to pour cold water on that, but they did know it in January, okay? And look at the clowns like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, how they delayed for, we could say, roughly 2 months. So the question is, what if Dr. Fauci or somebody else who knew what was going on, what if he had gone to WikiLeaks with a couple of memos and have them published? Is it possible that hundreds of thousands less people in our country, America, and other countries would have been infected by this? Is it possible that those 2 months of lead time, if people were forced to take this thing seriously, could have prevented more deaths, far more deaths than 9/11? That should speak to people. And I talked to somebody who's much smarter than I am today, and he said, Ray, you're onto something. You can show that the people who knew most about what was about to happen in 9/11 would have gone to WikiLeaks if it was up and running at the time. How do you know that? Because you asked them. Same with the attack on Iraq in 2003. There were at least 100 intelligence professionals who knew this was a big lie. Can you tell me that there's not one of those 100 that could have gone to WikiLeaks if it was up and running at the time? No, you can't tell me that, because I'm sure there is at least one. So, this shouldn't be a real hard thing to use in fostering a recognition of the incredible service that WikiLeaks can render just by being there, just by offering a secure way for people who see a calamity coming, 9/11, attack on Iraq, COVID-19, to do something about it, because the mainstream media is inept and corrupt. So I know I'm singing a song here, but I was affirmed in this song by this very intelligent friend. Said, look, Ray, you're onto something. You can prove what could have happened during those previous catastrophes. It should be easy enough, or not too hard at least, to go to people who can understand these things and say, look, you destroy the messenger. You're cutting your nose off to spite your face. And just so you realize that, just so people realize that doing this to Julian Assange not only can do a lot of damage to WikiLeaks, but also to others who would try to develop ways where people could go and whistleblow with some reasonable expectation of not getting caught. So I lay that out there again. I apologize if you all discussed this in previous sessions, but I guess I still feel that there's some merit in just telling this tale, adducing the earlier examples, citing the people who said, yeah, sure, we were so frustrated, we would have gone to WikiLeaks before 9/11 and before Iraq, and say, well, next time this happens, or let's just take this time, what would have happened if somebody had given some memos to WikiLeaks 2 months before Trump and Boris Johnson and the others decided to take this seriously? I think it's a good, not a tactic, it's a good way of informing people of the stakes involved here. And with that, I'll cease and desist for a while.
Yeah, so if we could jump back into the SAMS article, or the SAMS PDF actually, to talk a little bit more about the different methodologies and programs that they use. In addition to shrinking the entirely of the prisoner's world of the four corners of his prison cell, SAMS prevents anyone else from understanding what's happening within it. Prisoners under SAMS are prohibited from communicating with anyone except a few pre-approved individuals, their attorneys, and immediate family members. And SAMS prohibit those individuals from repeating the prisoner's words to anyone else. There is also an explicit prohibition on all forms of communication with the media. In effect, the regulation silences those most qualified to attest to the harms of SAMS. The Department of Justice further shrouds SAMS under a veil of secrecy by concealing who is subject to these conditions and why. Indeed, the Department of Justice and Federal Bureau of Prisons consistently ignore or deny Freedom of Information Act requests seeking basic information about prisoners under SAMS. The psychological and physiological harms are thus hidden from the public oversight and democratic accountability. And this really just kind of outlines who and how Julian's information is going to come out if he does end up in the U.S., because this won't be something that his lawyers are allowed to talk about. It won't be something that his immediate family members are allowed to talk about. It'll basically be what the judge decides to release to the public in regards to Julian's case. And I was really wondering, Elizabeth, if you could weigh in to see kind of how you feel as a reporter about the way that this lockdown would happen in regards to that information.
Well, I think it's interesting to note that there are some aspects of that description that are applying to Assange now. I mean, one of the last things we've heard that he said was, how can I'm not able to participate in this. And while obviously it would be much more extreme, like no question, in every aspect in the United States, I think it's really dire to see some shadows of that playing out at the moment with his inability to really connect with his lawyers, especially amongst this COVID-19 pandemic happening. I don't think there's any words to describe or convey how serious this is and how horrendous it is, especially for someone who's being prosecuted for being a journalist. I think, and I return to the question we were all discussing earlier, is how do we get people to understand that? I think that's, the most crucial part of this to me as well. So.
Well, I don't think that people are also really I don't think people understand exactly how bad the SAMS thing is. Like I said earlier, it is solitary on steroids. You are in a 8x10 cell, 22 hours a day. Sometimes you might get your 2 hours. Sometimes you might not. If there's not somebody there to babysit you while you stand in your outside cage rather than your inside cage, you don't get to do it. Your in-person visits are extremely limited and very difficult to set up. Your phone calls are difficult to set up. You don't get many of them. The restrictions are intense. You can only get 3 pages front and back of mail per week, I think, and the approval process is insane. And if your family member's phone number changes, it's a whole ordeal to get it, reapproved or whatever it is. And it is like a true, and I somewhere in the article, I think it says that the CIA calls it learned hopelessness or something like that. And it's this literal tactic to break someone down to their very core. And I think something else that troubles me is that we use it on people who haven't even been convicted yet, people who are, waiting to be, and that's insane to me because that's coercion. Really, it's a form of coercion. I think we're gonna have to explain to people how bad this is, because I think Ray was saying earlier, people aren't really paying attention to Julian or to any of this stuff in general, and it's going to be tough to get them to pay attention. But this is insane what they're doing.
And to underscore a point that Elizabeth made earlier, there is overlap. There's a lot of overlap with how he's being treated in Belmarsh and how he was treated in court, including the multiple strip searches on the first day of his court appearance. And again, the document mentions, even if they're in a secure facility, he's in the Guantanamo Bay of Belmarsh. He's being, perp walked from point A to point B. At no point is he let out of anyone's sight. And yet they strip search him for no reason other than to humiliate the man before they put him in a freaking human cage like he's goddamn Hannibal Lecter without contact with his attorneys while his court proceeding is going on. Insane is a fantastic word.
To add to that as well, we're already the document, the part of the document that you just read, Andrew, a little earlier, talks about only really being able to, have small talk with people, that your discussions are going to be completely censored. And we kind of have a version of that now with Julian, because I know that there was a lot of discussion at one point when he went into Belmarsh that even if he was mistreated, that he might not be able to speak out about that in a way that would get to the public because of the concern for retribution against him by the prison. So again, I'm not in any way, belittling the horrendous nature of the SAMs he would face in the US, but I am trying to observe the fact that there's already some shadows and echoes of this type of treatment that he's definitely undergoing already, for sure.
Exactly. And I remember, I think when it was, known that he would be under these special administrative measures in the US, I just remember seeing on Twitter, someone had brought up, well, he already under some of those in the UK, something similar? And then just even reading through this document a little bit, it's like, well, if he was, it's not like anybody would be able to know, So it's really, it's terrifying. And especially, this is happening to Julian Assange. And, this is something that I just feel like tyranny really, it just encroaches. There's nothing to say that this wouldn't happen to any one of us, or anybody as this starts to unfold and go along. And it's terrifying. Does anybody have an idea of how many people in the US are even on these type of measures? Or, is it rampant? Or Ray, do you know?
I don't know.
In the article, it says that it jumped from September 11th, 2001. In November 2001, there were 16 individuals. 2009, there were 30. And as of June 8th, 2017, there were 51. So it's definitely been increasing since 2001.
May I ask Elizabeth a question? Is the situation the same in London and England as it is in the United States? In other words, is there any reporting at all about what's going on in Belmarsh and at the court? Is there any halfway near objective reporting on Julian Assange in the mainstream press, so-called, in Britain?
Well, I'm not located in the UK, but I am aware that there has been, the great work of Taylor from, Action for Assange has gone to London and interviewed people. I know that also there are activists like Deepa Driver who were in, the courtroom in the last hearing where there was discussion about Assange being unwell. And there were a few journalists in the court at that time. Now, whether the journalists that were there, reported accurately is kind of a point of conversation. I know that Shadowproof's Kevin Gostola has done a really good job keeping up with everything factually and reporting on it. Other than that, I think it's been probably, I would guess, just from an outside perspective, I would guess it's probably been similar to the US. I bet it's kind of a lie of omission.
I'm going to add to that list Mohammed El-Mazi, who writes for Sputnik and a number of other outlets and has his own site called The Interregnum, and Tariq Haddad, who formerly worked for Newsweek and resigned in protest because he wanted to accurately cover the OPCW leaks and how the revelations that came out of WikiLeaks, and Newsweek told him no, so he quit. He started his own organization called The Watchdog. And both Mo and Tariq have courtroom access, so they're live tweeting as well as putting out information after the fact. let's see, who else? I mean, there were Gordon Dimmick, but he's on hiatus.
Craig Murray.
Oh yeah, Craig Murray has done incredible work. But yeah, there's not a lot of positive you get the usual, Guardian, where they'll give you just the basic bare bones of what occurred in court and then go through like the greatest hits of smears. And that's most of what I've seen from their more traditional or legacy media.
So the question I would have then in that case would be, have the British no shame? In other words, if the word got out in the mainstream media, actually that wonderful picture of Julian and Gabriel, that got into the Daily, what was it? Not the Daily Mirror, but the,
Daily
yeah. That was good. But all I'm thinking is, whoa, here we got a human story, a person who's been persecuted because he's a publisher. He's got a young family now, 2 little boys. He's got a fiancée, be a wife hopefully one day. There's a human story there, and when people learn that he's not a rapist, and that the British are just taking orders from Washington in an undisguised way, because the Washington people are right there in the front row telling the judge and the others what to do, have the British no shame? Well, maybe they don't. I mean, my Irish cousins say, no, they don't, Ray. Forget about it, all right?
Well, Bracer doesn't, that's for sure. She's more harsh than the U.S. government counsel. She goes beyond what they ask for, it seems like.
Right. Even the prosecution agrees with the defense very frequently. So I'm really frustrated, as we all are. How do you get that out? How do you say, well, this is a charade, or as John Pilger would say, a charade? It's really crazy, and it's not only crazy, it's barbaric. And do you British want to be associated with this kind of thing? You toadies, you poodles, you'll do anything that the U.S. asks you to do, even if it involves reversing 800 years of the fight for human rights and justice. My God, I guess my question is there no chance that were the British people to be informed about this, that they would rise up in horror and say, my God, that's what our government is doing to this person who unjustly has been accused of rape? I mean, this is beyond the pale.
I think Andrew would say that people would, right, Andrew? Andrew would want to say that they would. I think that we all want to think that people would rise up and do the right thing and fight against it. I think that they would, but I just don't know how we cut through not even just the disinformation, but the lack of information. And how do we cut through to people who don't know that there's anything beyond MSNBC every night? Or do you know what I mean? I feel like that's like you were saying, that's kind of where the issue lies. It's that we have to try to find a way to get through to people when
you've got to. A lot of that, I do honestly believe, if we get more artists on board, if we get more high-profile musicians on board, if we get comics on board that are known internationally, that can point to the fact that Vanessa Barrister is nothing more than a concierge for the U.S. State Department, it will hit home a little bit more. It's immensely frustrating because, all of us here know, and we're damned by what we know because it feels like we're screaming at each other. And we're trying to create a series of teach-ins. We're in the process of doing that right now. And one of the goals with that, and then we can get back to the SAMs, but one of the goals with that is to distribute it to the heads of other activist groups so that can go out through their mailing list, because there's a lot of disaffected people in a lot of U.S. political left organizations that know how to organize, that know how to phone bank, that know how to reach a fairly large number of people in a relatively short amount of time. So having said that, we should probably get back to what we're covering here. I want to highlight real quick. I believe it's card number. Well, it's card number 4, I think. And it's kind of the evolution of the process of the SAMs. Misty mentioned earlier, since 2001, the DOJ has been expanding the use when altering the SAMs regulations to allow for longer and more severe restrictions. There's that magic number. Shortly after the terrorist attacks in 9/11, the Bureau of Prisons placed all prisoners in its custody who were, quote, in any way linked to terrorist activities, unquote, into administrative detention as part of an immediate national security endeavor, which just sounds probably as horrific as it is. It appears that a major criterion for deciding whom to place under SAMs was not the prisoner's demonstrated capacity to communicate dangerous information, but rather their religion. It was in 2001. At the same time, the DOJ amended the SAM regulations to allow for harsher restrictions and less oversight. The new regulations tripled the length of time for which SAMs could be imposed without internal review from 120 days to a year, and they relaxed the standards for renewing SAMs. Before 2001, the DOJ had to demonstrate that the original reason justifying the measures still existed. In the post 9/11 era, the DOJ must only demonstrate that some reason exists for continued imposition, even if that reason has nothing to do with the original reason for their imposition. And lastly, the amended regulations clarified that SAMs could be imposed on pre-trial detainees. Finally, the post 9/11 SAMs regulations authorized prison officials to monitor communications between a prisoner and his attorney. This is all legal. Somebody talk me down, please. I'm about to start swearing loudly.
Well, when you mentioned, Steve, it's all legal. What is illegal is to monitor conversations between lawyers and clients, lawyers and prisoners, or lawyers and Julian Assange. Let's face it. The latest thing that I see Craig Murray wrote had to do with those film clips, actually, showing the Spanish, that Spanish outfit that was hired apparently by the CIA to monitor everything, including taking video of little Gabriel and stealing his diaper, trying to get DNA out of his stool. And, that's pretty graphic. And what people relate to these days, I learned in my old age, is graphic things, videos. And when you can see the surveillance going on between Julian and his lawyer, I mean, it's not a report that you read somewhere in a newspaper. It's there. You could see it. I've been in that room. I know that room. I've talked to Julian in that room myself. But there it is. So my thing is on this, that this is new. This is going to be the thrust of the defense argument if and when things resume in May. And I think that to the degree we can get people who read us or listen to us prepared for that, and to show this pretty egregious violation of the client lawyer privilege that obtains pretty much everywhere in the civilized world. And my God, this is pretty bad. So just to throw that out as that plus the human element of Assange and his 2 little boys, Julian has a reason to live. I looked at those photos and I cried. I said, well, all right, Julian's going to hang on there as long as he can. I mean, look at these beautiful little boys, and look at the beautiful little wife. So there are human things that people can relate to. I'm no expert in PR, but I throw those out as things that we might want to focus on.
Well, and Elizabeth, I actually wanted to ask you too, how do you feel as a journalist? Because the restrictions on talking to the press, their families can't speak to the press. They're not allowed to speak to the press. So you guys are shut off from all information. Like it was really hard for them to, write this report up because there's like gag orders on everybody and you can't talk about anything. And so there's no oversight and there's no accountability and nothing is public. And so how do you feel as a journalist that is something that they're, that like the slippery slope term, like how do you feel about how shut out you are from information?
Horrendous. I'm sure every independent journalist who's covering this feels horrendous about it and angry. And I think that it's already enough of a black hole. So to think about it getting worse is just kind of unimaginable at this point. We hear almost nothing as it is. So yeah, the idea that there'd be a gag order on a gag order on a gag order, it leaves you speechless. It's awful, just awful. And I think to add to what Ray was just saying as well, it reminds me again, I read an article a couple of years ago about comparing the attempted extradition of Pinochet and the Assange attempted extradition, and the fact that Pinochet, was going to be tried for war crimes and not specifically war crimes, crimes against humanity, and he was let go for health reasons. They did not extradite him for health reasons, and now we've got Julian Assange in the UK's Guantanamo amongst a giant pandemic, and they won't release him because he hasn't been convicted. I just, that would be another thing that I would throw out if, to share or to look at. And just make people aware of that, the hypocritical contrast there. The way that the UK will protect a tyrannical dictator that was a friend of Thatcher and Kissinger, but it will sell, and export a journalist to the US to be thrown into a literal and metaphorical black hole.
I also wanted to ask Kendra too. You've really gotten into activism lately yourself, and so. How do you feel about, because we all know that like now even environmentalists are being called terrorists. So I think, myself, I consider myself an activist. Steve, I'm sure you can speak on this too. Andrew, you can speak on this. We all can. But I feel like there's kind of this obvious down the road attack coming for any activist or anybody who dares to dissent. And it's kind of, implied here. It's, all they have to do is say you're a threat. And that's all they need. And they can shove you in a box for a decade and nobody will ever hear from you. And that's terrifying. So I'm just wondering how, I guess anybody can answer, but how do you guys feel about that? It seems like it's a clear path to me of where that might be headed.
I think I've thought about that. I've thought about that especially a lot more now. But one thing too is I would say that I don't think you really realize the oppression that you're living under until you try to break out of it a little bit, or until you take that little step of courage. So for me, that was that's been an experience from the beginning. It wasn't until I even got on Twitter, before I really knew too much, even posting things that I thought. And I'm like, holy cow, I'm already, self-censoring myself and whatnot. And then, so that was kind of a progression, but then also, I have deeper spiritual reasons myself for supporting Julian. And I can't, I don't want to live in a world where truth is a crime. I think that's such a crime. I think even these special administrative measures, what we're reading is just codified, evil, basically. It's so terrible. It's just so bad, but it is terrifying. And there are some days that are better than others. But honestly, when I first was starting to, when Assange got arrested, that was a big turning point for me. I was like, that's enough. And, I just had planned on joining another group, and it's just the way that things worked out. It was obvious that that's not what was available to me. What was available to me is starting something, and that, that's how things get started, is people in positions like that where they're like, okay, well, I guess it's me. So I kind of knew I'd have to be out there, even if you're running a group, you're going to have to be out there. And so it was honestly sort of a decision I made a long time ago, because I can be quite a pessimist. So I really, I love people like Andrew and things like that, and others to keep that bright side going. But yeah, Misty, it is terrible. But to me, it's where those cliches come into play, which are true. A lot of, every man dies, but not every man lives. And I mean, I'm just living, I feel like, a little bit. And I'm so grateful to people like Julian Assange, or even, the two guests tonight and everybody on the show, with what everybody's done. I think that's really, it's amazing. I mean, some really amazing people out there with the tides against them, and standing up for that. But yeah, it's terrifying. I don't know how the rest of you guys feel.
I was talking about this earlier with Whitney Webb when she was on Slow News Day. By the way, if you're seeing this for the first time, I have a show called Slow News Day, and I interview incredible people, including Elizabeth Boss, and hopefully soon, someday, Mr. Ray McGovern. We were talking about this, and look, before I was out of high school, I was in Grateful Dead parking lots doing what people do in Grateful Dead parking lots. And I went to the WTO protest. I got my head bashed in by the police for the first time there. I've done some form of activism or volunteer work that is of the variety of sticking your neck out for something that the national security state or authority in general doesn't like. So the only thing that makes it worse now is that the tools of surveillance are better now, and the justifications for why don't seem to fucking matter. And with that, kind of hurled at us, I think that it is our job to get much, much louder, so that it becomes a situation where they can't get all of us. Andrew?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, and that's why I was kind of just sitting back, because it can't really get summed up any better. But we had a question that did come in from chat, so I will field that either Ray or Elizabeth, whoever wants to step up for it. But it is, the international community and international law have no real power to intervene in Julian Assange's release. So do you guys know of what international bodies or authorities could step in to stop this extradition, if there's any at all possible?
We know that the UN has spoken out twice talking about his arbitrary detention. That doesn't seem to matter at all. The US and UK are past heeding anything the UN says. I'm not quite sure of the at least the powers on the books of the EC or the European Court or anything like that. But I don't think that they would be honored, maybe only in the breach. And just as a very clear situation of the British vassals heeding what Washington says, and it couldn't be more easily demonstrated than those fancy clothed fellows there in the front row, Washington lawyers advising Baritza and everybody else what to do and what to say. I'm old enough to have been through a lot of things that have been pretty depressing before. And if I may, I'd just like to cite my old a publicist that I really liked, E.F. Stone, I.F. Stone, actually. And, he fought the good fight. And his admonition was this: look, you have to go into this with your eyes wide open, okay? Because you're going to lose. And then you're going to lose. And then you're going to lose again. And then one bright day, someone who is at least as avidly for justice and truth, like you, is going to win. Now, you may not be around to see that, but it's going to happen. But meanwhile, you got to sort of go into this with almost with a sense of humor, if you can, with an attitude that, look, you do what you can. It doesn't seem to be enough, but you do it anyway. And like Ben Ferencz. Maybe you all don't know Ben Ferencz. He was the last surviving prosecutor at Nuremberg. Okay, he died at 93, I think, 2 years ago. And he says, I have this advice to you all. It's a threefold advice. And this advice is as follows. Never give up. Never give up. And never give up. That's what we're called to do. It looks pretty bad. We have to sort of try to seem as though we believe that this is going to come out all right. I have two minds about the focus on what happens in U.S. prisons. I don't even want to think about it, although I admire you for digging all that stuff up because it is pretty effective exposing. But what I'd prefer is to focus on how we can show what's already happened to Julian, particularly the interference with his lawyers, and to focus on the human Julian Assange and his little boys, Max, not Max and Moritz, but Max and Gabrielle, and his lovely wife. That should speak to other people as well. After all, we're all human beings. Last time I checked, we're all human beings.
I think that's such a good point, Ray. I have another one for you. I have a good friend that says, you can't lose them all.
That's the kind of humor you need.
Yes.
I think just by the sheer den of what we all do for work, it's gallows humor 99% of the time anyway. When you delve into some truly dark shit, you come out with a pretty warped sense of humor. And I've had one of those for quite a while now. So it's only aging. It's getting, it's fermenting. I suppose.
Spicier with time. There you go.
Here's hoping. I do want to kind of pull back a little bit into the overall conversation about the special administration, because I really want to drive this home, because I think it can become a part of a conversation in a larger sphere of media. If enough people know what they are and what's going to happen, we encourage people in the chats all the time, like, go hit up your favorite content creators. Tell them to talk about this. If you as the audience member know more about this subject than your favorite content creators, then educate them. A lot of those people will have audience members on the show for a conversation about it. Like, drive this home, because it is codified torture, and that's not okay.
It really is bizarre, though, that more independent people, like, independent journalists, media, content creators, whatever, it's really been kind of surprising to me that they haven't been more vocal, because they don't, like, Kyle Kalinske doesn't seem like an idiot. He has to know this is coming for him next. And I know he's done some coverage and stuff, but come on, dude, this is coming for you. And you could be talking to your audience about this a lot more than you are. And I don't understand. He's a smart guy. He's got to know. So it just blows my mind that more of them aren't talking about this.
That brings up a question I had for Steve, because I think, was it earlier today, you had mentioned on Twitter something about some lefty and indie media figures were open with you about not wanting to come on because of the damage to their revenue. Did you want to speak out about that, or name some names? Or
well, we've talked about it. We've talked about it a couple of times before. One of them I'll leave up to Andrew's discretion. But the first person that comes to mind is Jamal Thomas. Like, he flat out said, every time I talk about this, I get hidden from the front page. I get demonetized. My other videos get demonetized. I'm not going to do it.
That's incredible to me because I think it was only a year ago. I think I was on his show a couple of different times within about a week specifically to talk about Julian Assange. That's really sad to hear.
He went the direction of I'm going to do this for a living. This is going to be how I pay my bills, and went 100% into the horse race, doing 7 videos a day about Elizabeth Warren and shit.
And they don't want to talk about anything that will piss anybody off. They're trying to please the greatest number of people humanly possible because it's become all about the clicks now. And that's just where it is. I mean, and I get it. I mean, Aaron Mateo was on Jimmy Dore the other day talking about, he's like, dude, this is my career. There are certain things that I'm not going to be able to talk about if I want to have a job. And I totally understand that. But I'm also really appreciative of people like Steve and his show on Slow News Day, and the Action for Assange live stream, and Elizabeth's work and Ray's work. Like this is why I have a love affair with truth tellers. You guys don't let it become all about the clicks or the paycheck or the subscriptions or the whatever. And that's what we need. And I get that it's hard to do that. That's a pretty big move to take, but it's so important to do that now because we have like a serious information vacuum, and it's a problem in this country and around the world, but I mean in this country especially.
Well, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say what I really hope to see is new platforms like Rockfin and different places like that, Mastodon, DLive, be used for these content creators that are nervous about putting information out like this out on YouTube. Because Jamarl squeezed a conversation about Julian Assange inside of one of his other videos. And Jimmy does a similar thing where they do. I don't want to say that they don't, but a lot of times they'll fit a conversation about Julian in around the political horse race, which I think has its effects, but it doesn't drive it home to people directly that, hey, this is a core central issue of our time. And I hope that the other platforms become where they'll put out this more uncensored content and stop the self-censoring instead of using these platforms to just mirror what's on their YouTube channel already. Because I really think without
one of the most important issues that we're dealing with right now, because like everybody will say climate change probably aside from the coronavirus, but I mean, we aren't going to be able to have a legitimate conversation on climate change if we can't have a legitimate conversation. If we don't have facts and evidence, and we don't have a free press, and is any of that stuff really going to matter? No, we're already getting propagandized, daily, all day, every day.
We had Crystal Ball straight lie to Andrew's face about being a part of one of our demonstrations in DC. We were in front of the building where the Hill has their offices and Politico has their offices, and Crystal Ball came out, and Andrew went to go talk to her about what we were doing, why we were in DC, and the impact that it has on press freedom. And she goes, well, yeah, I'd be happy to do that, shoot me, but just bullshit, absolute bullshit, 100%. Okay, little activist, thanks, I'm on my way to CNN in my $900 coat now.
Wow. I mean, like what you were saying earlier about. Sorry, what?
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that pretty early on, I didn't begin to involve myself in journalism for a paycheck. So I never went into it with that mindset. And then, as people actually started to treat me as a journalist, which was more of a shock to me, I think, than anybody else, I made a really conscious decision that I wasn't going to make it a full-time job. That I'm not relying on it for a paycheck to pay my bills, because then you do start to, even unintentionally, even just having small ads on the side or whatever, it mutates your intention and your attitude towards the information, the way you write it. And so I totally empathize. If you're a journalist that has to rely on that for your income, I don't want to judge too harshly, but at the same time, I think that, that's why your intention is so important, and it's so easy to go down that slippery slope. And I think it's not, I've seen a lot of journalists actually do that, and it's really disheartening to see that happen. So.
If I may, to put a little perspective on this goes back 40 years. I was just a boy at the time. I was working at the CIA, and Bill Casey came in to be the head of the CIA under Ronald Reagan. And well, that was January 1981, right? So in February, they had their first cabinet meeting. And each of the cabinet officers, and don't ask me why the head of the CIA should be a cabinet officer. He shouldn't be. Okay, there really shouldn't be any policymaking role for the head of the CIA. But there he was. Okay, everyone was asked by Reagan, tell us what your objectives are. Now, I should probably note at the outset that a good friend of mine was there. Her name is Barbara Honegger. She was working for one of the domestic policy advisors, and she took copious notes. And this is what Bill Casey said. We'll know that our disinformation campaign has been successful when the American people believe everything we tell them, period, end quote. Now, I don't know how the other cabinet officers reacted to that, but Barbara copied it down word for word, and then she gave it to Sarah McClendon, who published it in, I guess, the Washington Post at the time. And everybody forgot about it. Well, Bill Casey's now for his eternal reward or otherwise, and he must be rolling over in his grave saying, wow, I thought I was doing a little hyperbole, but here we are. We own the New York Times. And they do. I don't know exactly how it works, but watch the Times today, talking about how the intelligence community did a great job on Russiagate, whereas the Attorney General and the people who know the score are about to indict the head of the CIA, head of the FBI, and head of the National Intelligence. Okay, so why the New York Times can be so bought by the government, I don't know. But they are, and they were, and demonstrably, they gave George W. Bush a second term by suppressing the information that he was violating all our rights under the Fourth Amendment by monitoring all our telephone calls and our emails. They had that information 5 months before the election. They suppressed it. And they didn't allow it to appear until a year later, after the election, when James Risen said, hey, I'm going to publish a book on this now, and it's going to be embarrassing if, I work for you guys, you pay me a big fat check, and here you don't put it in your newspaper. Then and only then did the New York Times publish that. So in my view, the New York Times knew best what was best, and what was best was George W. Bush not suffering this indignity of having exposed that he had spied on us ever since he and Cheney came in. And so these people have this notion that they know what's best for us. And it's part and parcel of what my tutor or the person who taught me journalism, Bob Perry, who died 2 years ago. I'll tell you a little vignette. I think this is very telling. He unveiled several of the really important secrets of Iran Contra. Okay, he got many awards for that. He was working for AP most of the time. Then he got invited down to Newsweek to be a real high-paid, he had really format at that part, as the Germans say. Okay, so one of the gurus from Newsweek said, Bob, we're going to have a little party here, a cocktail party, a little dinner, and only 12 people, but we'd like you to come, okay? And who was there? Well, it was all men, of course, 85, 6. A young representative from Wyoming by the name of Dick Cheney, General Brent Scowcroft, who had just stepped down from being the National Security Advisor. And as Bob is dipping into his shrimp cocktail, which he said was very good, Ray, General Scowcroft says, apropos of not much else, my successor, Admiral Poindexter, is going to appear before Congress on Tuesday, and if I were advising him, I would certainly tell him to say that we never told the president anything about Iran-Contra. Now, Bob, unaccustomed to this society, drops his fork, shatters his shrimp cocktail thing, and without thinking says, General Scowcroft, do I understand you to say that you would advise your successor to perjure himself before Congress? Yeah, that's how quiet it was for about 20, 30 seconds, as Bob describes it. And then the head of Newsweek put his arm around Bob and said, now, Bob, sometimes you have to do what's best for the country. Whole bunch of gentlemanly laughter. Okay? Now, see, they know what's best for the country, and they're subservient to CIA because they think that the CIA knows what's best for the country, and that's what rules our media. And of course, the 6 major mega corporations that control most of the stuff are all profiteering from building and selling arms. So it's pretty incestuous. So I don't want to depress everybody. You guys already know this, but that's what we're up against. And it's not excluded from saying, you guys in the press, you're really following Bill Casey's diktat very well. You're believing everything that the CIA and MI6, doesn't MI6 run The Guardian, for God's sake? I mean, hello, people, wake up. This is what's happened. And it's been happening gradually, but now it's particularly acute, and it's a particularly open possibility for us to come in here with the virus the way it is and just explore new horizons. Sorry for talking so much.
Don't ever be sorry. Yeah, literally just said in that you should have your own.
You have a wicked echo, Misty.
I do?
Oh, it's better now.
Oh, good. Okay. Kevin? Anyways, right. I was just saying in the chat that you should have your own channel, Story Time with Ray, because you have the best stories. I could listen to you all day.
Thank you. That's what my wife says. I only have a limited number, and I tend to repeat them.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap up the conversation on the special administrative measures. Just suffice it to say it's beyond brutal. The simple fact that the FBI has an officer attached to a prisoner visit, be it friend, family, or lawyer, and the FBI has the discretion to censor the conversation as it's taking place, and the fact that if the FBI officer isn't able to monitor the visit can be canceled at a moment's notice, no matter how far a family has had to drive to be there, no matter how far the attorney has to drive to be there. It is entirely up to the whim of a random FBI agent. And again, all of this apparently perfectly legal. And to just touch on a little bit more regarding the censorship. If you're locked up under special administrative measures, you're cut off from everything. You're cut off from TV time. You're cut off from reading a newspaper. You absolutely have no contact with the internet. Here we go. So the DOJ recognizes that this level of censorship is difficult to justify. While the DOJ imposes SAMs on a prisoner, an assistant attorney general sends a letter to the Bureau of Prison explaining the conditions and reasons for that particular person's SAMs. In every letter that the BOP has released, the DOJ has conceded that eliminating the inmate's access to media may be an excessive measure, except in the most egregious of circumstances. But in those letters, the DOJ never explains why an individual case constitutes those most egregious of circumstances. Instead, the DOJ provides a boilerplate explanation that restricting prisoners' access to media may help to interrupt communication patterns the inmate may develop with the outside world. The DOJ does not explain how reading an uncensored version of Time magazine might allow prisoners to develop such communication patterns. This is the absolute ridiculousness of what entails special administrative measures. It's, again, we live in a cartoon, and this is a cartoonish response to how to deal with a prisoner. I don't know. Liz, what do you got?
Well, I agree with what you've said, and I also noticed when I was reading this PDF that they mentioned that the cells that the prisoners are put into are less than 8 by 10 feet. That's smaller than a planted garden bed that I made in my backyard or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, it's absolutely insane. So to have all of these things compounding each other, I don't see how anyone could not avoid losing their mind in that situation. I think it's just, I mean, horrendous beyond measure. I think it's the utmost example of the Orwellian state that we have in the United States. I'm
ready. Well, and in a number of places, solitary cells have lower ceilings too.
Right.
So if you're tall, you always have to hunch over. If you're a shorter person, you still feel like you want to hunch over and so that compounds like the aches and pains in your body. You have a shit mattress, or you're sleeping on a concrete floor. It's just compounded torture. And again, we've got a lot of this is overlapping with how Julian is currently being treated in Belmarsh prison right now. We've got to generate a lot more noise. Like, if anybody knows how to get a hold of Roger Waters, tell him to call 10 fucking friends. Okay? Like, I don't know what else to say about that.
Well, and to your point too, Elizabeth, you were talking about how there would be literally nobody that could go through that and not lose their mind. I was reading this, multiple like corrections officials and, commissioners and wardens have like been, coming out and saying that they spent time, like one guy spent 20 hours in his solitary confinement cell and was like, I was ready to lose my mind.
That was in Colorado, right? Yeah.
What?
I think I wrote an article a long time ago about Assange being in effective solitary confinement when they cut him off from communication within the embassy. And I think I know what you're talking. There was I think it was a guy in Colorado who did that, and they were talking about it drove them crazy within 20 hours, or at least on what they felt.
I mean, if you really think about it, we're all kind of experiencing it, to a very small degree right now with the quarantine. I mean, we're all kind of shut off and cooped up, and we all are kind of feeling, but if you multiply that by like 1,000, you might get some idea of what this could maybe be like. I mean, you're shut off from they even go so far as to put you in a different wing so that you can't even communicate through the air vents in the prison. I mean, it's that isolated. And to me, that's insanity. Like, that seems like that's inhumane on so many levels. It's incredible to me that this is something that we've allowed to happen as a species. It's depressing. But yeah, I mean, when you have, experts and wardens and people coming out saying that they took part and it sucked, I'm going to take their word for it. It sucks. And nobody should go through that. Certainly not a journalist who exposed war crimes. That should be celebrated.
And the big difference, of course, is those people that touch the system, they know they're going to get out.
Right.
So as bad as it is, and I can speak from personal experience about this. There's a prison right beneath the federal courthouse at the bottom of Manhattan called the Tombs, and I've been there. I've done that. Okay, there are prisons in Washington. I've done that too. 2 cubicles the size of what just was explained, and 2 steel things. The second guy came in about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was pretty grim. incredible cacophony, noise all night. But I knew I was going to get out. I knew I was going to get out in the morning. And, you know, people have to taste that, but they also have to realize that the difference is bigger than the similarity. If you know you're going to get out, you know, then yeah, it's painful, and it's learned helplessness. I mean, I was helpless. I couldn't even get a guard to give me a drink of water. Okay, but still, you're going to get out. So I think I'm delighted, Steve, that you apparently picked on this thing, and it needs to be publicized what could happen, because people aren't by nature barbaric. At least I don't think they were or are. And so I hope we can get that theme up and out the way it should be.
I think we can. I really do. I think this is one of those things. Do you remember when the torture program was finally disclosed and people went apeshit across every corner of the country? Like, people were genuinely outraged, and I mean, I guess it eventually led to we tortured some folks, and that's bad. But apparently they quote unquote shut down the torture programs. I don't believe that for a second, but it did lead to like a congressional inquiry and things of that nature. And I do honestly believe that when you put torture right in front of the average American's face, their natural inclination is to recoil in horror. And we need to get that point across, because this is horrific what is being done to Julian Assange.
Steve, they didn't call it torture. It was enhanced interrogation. No, really. The New York Times avoided for years the word torture. It was not allowed, okay? And yet everyone knew exactly what it was. But the significance of that is that the Americans reading the newspaper, the New York Times flagship says enhanced interrogation technique. Oh, that must be interesting. They've refined it, so maybe it doesn't hurt it as much anymore. Maybe they get more truth out of it. You know, people
They're
just
tickling the information out of them now.
Yeah.
That's so true even about the special administrative measures. You know, I mean, that sounds so benign. It doesn't sound like it'd be a big deal. You know, maybe he has to fill out some extra paperwork, or, I mean, I don't know. But
it's that special.
Yeah.
That's strange.
I'm so glad you all found this PDF, though, because even when I was researching solitary confinement to report on it in reference to Julian Assange, I didn't see any mention of this, and I'm sure for good reason. I don't think many people are aware of these measures and the fact that they're codified, legal, that this is something that goes on. As you all mentioned at the beginning of the show, there are all these gag orders flying around so that people that have experienced it can't even talk about it. So I'm really glad that you're able to go through this thing and show some details about what Assange is facing.
Yeah, and I don't know how much time you guys have tonight, or what. We're probably going to transition over into the rest of our news segment. You are, of course, welcome to stay. You are, of course, welcome to come back on the vigils at any point. Yeah, I think we should pull back from the SAMs for a moment, because this document is like 47 pages long. We're going to come back to it throughout the Vigil series here, and I think we should make a point to hammer on it at least once a week now that we're doing 3 shows a week, because we're crazy.
Dave, I'm just really glad to know that we weren't talking about surface-to-air missile systems tonight.
Right? I'm glad that hasn't become part of this particular story yet. I really am. Not for lack of U.S. politicians calling to drone strike, Julian. That's for sure.
We've got so many horrendous techniques and methods that we've run out of acronyms, so they have to start using the same.
Well, I'm going to have to check out now. It's been a pleasure, as usual, being with you all, people, and I hope we see
Yeah,
each other.
if you could, Ray, real quick before you leave, let people know where they can find you.
Okay, that's right. My son who runs my website always says, "Dad, if you don't mention the website, I'm not even going to work on it anymore." It's raymcgovern.com. Really hard to remember. raymcgovern, one word.com. I also publish on consortiumnews.com, which is an independent, and we're doing okay in terms of finances, even though we don't advertise. And that, of course, has a wide gamut of authors and a good following of Julian. So, but there's a website and there's a Twitter at Ray McGovern, and my son puts it up on Instagram and Facebook as well, although I'm not a frequent visitor of these latter two. So thanks for asking. And again, good luck. Let's never give up.
Thanks, Ray.
Good to see you again, Ray.
Man, I love it when Ray's on.
And just real quick, while we have everybody's attention, I am posting in the chat the link to this week's Vigil actions. Every week we're going to be every Vigil, so 3 different ones per week, we're going to be putting out actions that people can engage in online right now. We have petition signings as well as the senators that signed the order to basically demand that Julian's asylum be removed. We have their Twitter handles as well as their local office phone numbers. So we ask that people send them educational information or as polite as possible voicemails about Julian's situation right now. But one thing, Elizabeth, before we let you go, and it's already been happening behind the scenes independently, so I really appreciate it. But we've been working on building every Saturday global digital marches between the US, New Zealand, Australia, and other European groups. Do you think you could help get other creators involved on doing a stream on Saturdays or Sundays about specifically Julian's situation, or some ways that we could help politely pressure content creators to do that?
Absolutely. I think Sundays I'm free in the afternoon, and Saturdays probably afternoon, evening. So either one of those days would be all right. But I'd love to try. I can't promise anything because, you know, as you all have faced, sometimes creators will kind of say, no, I can't do that, but I can try my best for sure.
Cool. Because Consortium actually does a great job. Like they stream the Free the Truth event, they stream the DEA events. So I'd like to direct people to you guys as a resource to get up-to-date information too.
Yeah. I can definitely talk to Joe about it. Sure, I'll try.
Cool. Could you leave us with some final thoughts on where people can find you and your work?
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Elizabeth, LEAVOS. I'm also on Facebook. I have a page there where I share my work. I contribute once in a while to Consortium News. You can find my articles there. And other than that, I mean, my thoughts are kind of, you know, the same as they've been for a while, unfortunately, and that is that we just have to keep doing what we can. That although the COVID-19 situation prevents people from getting into the streets, as Ray said, just do whatever you can, even if it doesn't feel like enough. And I know myself personally, it definitely, you know, doing what you can sometimes really doesn't feel like enough, but you just have to keep doing it anyway. So I really appreciate you all putting on these vigils and continuing to speak out on this no matter what, and especially 3 times a week now. That's an incredible undertaking. So thank you all. And great to meet you, Misty, off of Twitter.
Me too. I know. Me too.
Good to talk. Thank you. Have a great night, you all.
You
Have a
too.
good night.
Thank you.
Well, that was freaking awesome.
Dude, I'm fangirling all over the place. I'm not even kidding.
So as we go into news, we are going to kind of circle back a little bit because we brought this up earlier and Ray had mentioned it. But the article out of the West Australian just really brings a lot more detail to the spying on Stella Morris and the 2 children that she had with Julian Assange. I'll just go ahead and kind of run down it real quick. A Spanish security firm tailed the mother of Julian Assange's fiance and illegally recorded hours of footage of their baby son According to court documents, Stella Morris revealed her identity as the WikiLeaks founder's fiance on April 11th, 3 days before a London court could lift a non-publication order on her name. The 37-year-old and Assange had 2 children while he was seeking asylum, granted asylum, well, he had been given asylum and was a citizen of Ecuador, and staying in the Ecuadorian embassy in London between 2012 and 2019. Jailed Assange is now battling in a London court to avoid extradition to the U.S. to face charges of violating spy laws and computer intrusion. When he was holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy, I hate how they phrase that. Spanish firm UC Global was providing security, but the company was allegedly spying on the Australian and his guests on behalf of the U.S. at the time. A criminal complaint against UC Global owner David Morales is currently being probed by Spain's national court. Let's drop down a little bit. Morales sent an email to staff on September 21st, 2017, calling for special attention on Stella Morris. He even ordered someone to tail Morris's mother, who the company had discovered was living in the Spanish province of Catalonia. If necessary, I want a person fully dedicated to this activity. So if you have to hire someone to do it, let me know. All this has to be considered top secret, so the dissemination will be limited. UC Global had Assange and Morris's son in the crosshairs as well, with Gabriel's visits to the embassy constantly watched. Hours of footage of the infant stored on company computers were handed to the Spanish court by former employees. Good on those former employees. A former staff member has given a sworn statement to the Madrid court alleging that Morales was determined to prove that Assange was Gabriel's father. The protected witness says on one occasion they were even ordered to steal the baby's diaper to conduct a DNA test on his feces, because that's something that normal people do.
Well, and the question too, when you were going through that, Steve, like thinking about that, it's like, and for what purposes? Like, what was the, that the plan was to just completely use that against him even more.
Oh, yeah, you hold that over his head. We know this is your kid. Do you like your kid? Be ashamed if something happened to your kid, wouldn't it? That's
as a mother, that creeps me out so much that somebody's like rummaging around in the garbage for your baby's dirty diaper. Like, that's sick.
Yeah.
Sick. And I don't like that kind of violation of somebody's privacy and somebody's family life is so gross. And I just can't imagine. I can't imagine what she has to go through. I really can't.
No, and just
it's
one
the
more
situation
time,
that makes ultimately her and Julian feel even more powerless or downtrodden, because it gets the names of their kids get held over them in court. The very real threat of some kind of U.S. intelligence plot or private security firm plot like this one, or like something far more maniacal, gets pushed against them. And Stella talked about it in her interview that she did, where she said she realized at some point that she may not be able to defend her children. And to me, as someone raising 2 children of a similar age, that's why I do this, is to try to build a better world for them. So that, like, I just hope that those kids give Julian such a place of strength to come from a different angle, as wanting to see the world that he has impacted change for the better.
Well, and also
the kid was really good for me anyway. Like, just being able to see him with his sons and smiling, and I mean, it was the best I think any of us had seen him in a while. So, I mean, we haven't seen him in forever, but yeah, I'm really hoping, I hope you're right, Andrew. I hope that the 2 boys give him, a real sense of like not really a purpose, but like a grounding. Like, it grounds him in a place that's real and worth fighting for, I guess. Because I can't imagine what he's dealing with. I really can't.
And if we could hop back into that article, because there's a little bit more that I want to make sure that gets brought up, because it was actually the headline for the WikiLeaks tweet. Because there was a Ecuadorian embassy staff member, I believe, that was extorted with extremely private photographs.
Yeah. UC Global allegedly spied on Ecuadorian diplomatic staff and indicating Morales was working for the U.S. government. When Morales was concerned Ecuador wanted to end the security contract, he tried to use, quote, intimate photos, unquote, of a diplomat stolen from her personal hard drive to blackmail Ecuador's foreign intelligence agency, SINAIN, not to pull out. These extremely private photographs were allegedly in the possession of UC Global, were printed, and were part of an extortion report that sought to prevent SINAIN from terminating the contract, Assange's criminal complaint says. The Australian's legal team says Spanish evidence proves UC Global helped the U.S. record Assange's intimate life inside the embassy. Now, look, if the West Australian, and we can kill that article, if the West Australian was doing its job, because I consider that to be like more biased than just factual reporting, that article, if they were doing their job, they've got numerous amounts of articles from El País, the Spanish language magazine that has been reporting consistently on UC Global for months and months and months, including printing out the emails that had been submitted into evidence. They've got Stefania Maruzzi, who has been doing incredible work reporting on this. Like, they're not lacking for source material. So it's Christine Assange has a number of tweets out about how you can help Julian, and one of the suggestions contained is fact check these people in real time. When you see an article come out and it's wrong, fact check the outlet that printed it and the author that printed it, the writer that printed it, and encourage other people to do the same.
I agree on that. And I think one thing too, and I don't know, I'm just speaking from my own experience, like sometimes you'll see those come out and they're just, they're so well done, but it's also, just even a short sentence to these guys, like on the website or something, complaining about it, that's enough. It doesn't have to be, perfect. It just has to be out there. And I think that's important too, because the bottom line is this something, it's, it affects all of us. Like, free press is for everybody. The idea that there's, Sam's out there, that affects everybody. That Julian was spied on like that, that's something that's, anytime power's doing that can affect us all. And we don't have to be perfect when we correct things. I mean, we need to be factual, but it's just do what you can, send it out there. I think that's important too.
I think there's actually a really good quote from Julian where he said that when we notice an injustice and we don't do anything, and I'm probably butchering this, but when we notice an injustice and we don't act, we're training ourselves to be accepting of that. And that's what it is. And I mean, we're all sitting here witnessing this major attack on free speech and a free press and on Julian himself. And I feel like there should be more people angry about it and worried about it and screaming about it. And it's depressing that there aren't more. I'm grateful for the ones that are, though. And I think you guys are right. I think we just need to be louder. We have to be louder. We're kind of at, I've talked about it before with you guys, I think, but it's like we're in a tipping point. We're at like this weird crossroads in humanity. And it's what happens from here is going to be a huge, it's going to make a huge difference in where we go, I think.
And one of the things too is there was always memes going around and people saying in tweets that, they're not after Julian Assange. They're after all of us, like the people of the world. And he just stood in their way. And it's something that with the way that governments around the world have cracked down on free association and free speech and just the basic ability to communicate on the internet right now, really shows that that's the fact, because we've now all been placed into house arrest for better or worse. And it's something that instead of addressing those larger issues like the surveillance state and like the expansion of military powers on the street where people are literally being forced into their homes if they're not wearing masks or doing something essential, that is an assault on the freedom of association and the First Amendment as much as our right to know information about our government and about the war crimes and about what our tax dollars are being used for. So there's this double front, so to speak, I guess, going after the First Amendment because it includes religion, freedom of information, press speech, as well as the freedom of association. So while Julian's trial is going on that ultimately risks destroying the very foundation of a free and open society, you have them coming in with these draconian police state measures before any measure of relief is given to people, where they're going to be tracking all of us on our smartphones before everyone has access to food right now.
Well, and I mean, let's kind of summarize all of that real quick. Julian Assange is a test subject right now. And this human test subject is being used to determine how we all act. And if we all roll over and let this man die, then there is 100% justification for them to go forward with the complete elimination of free speech, free press, of publishers being able to print material that is embarrassing to the government, embarrassing to a corporation, embarrassing to, let's say, a chief magistrate's husband and son. It is...
I literally just tweeted that out. If we let them do this to Julian, we're telling them it's okay to do it to us. That's exactly what's happening. If we let them do this to him, we're telling them it's okay. You can do it to us too.
Go ahead, Andre.
I was just going to say, because the thing is, if they can not even hide, but publicly curtail outrage about the open and fully visible torture of the most awarded journalist in the last 50 years, for them to take an Andrew Smith or a Bob or a Jenny right off the street and do the same thing because they're an asymptomatic carrier or whatever other reason they decide to come up with, we're just going to be gone. There's not going to be a press to fight back to reclaim any of us.
Well, I feel like, I know we got a lot more news that we need to cover, but I feel like it's been 2 hours and we're starting to see some people drop off. Do you want to go ahead and go around the room and give some final thoughts here?
Yeah. There's one thing that's kind of been developing that I want people to look at, and it came out from @USHackers on Twitter. It's something I'm not fully sure about, so I don't want to say it's real and factual and accurate, but apparently there has been a breach of the World Health Organization, the CDC, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and multiple other global authoritarian institutions. And I don't know the contents of them yet, but they're saying that they're going to be slow releasing them to show people the webs of corruption that have been built behind the scenes. So check it out, see what you think. There's not really any information out yet about that beyond, hey, we have these. So that's pretty much my final thought, is there's still more information that we don't know.
I would just say I'm glad we had Ray on, because he was very positive, and he's been in this game for a while. So I always look to people like him for kind of, how to keep my cool, because sometimes I feel like I'm going to lose my shit. But yeah, I'm glad we had Ray on. I'm glad we had Elizabeth on. I'm really glad we talked about this, because like I said before, I really didn't know a ton about how extreme the SAM's measures were. So I'm really glad that we did this. I'm glad you guys had me on. I appreciate it. And yeah, that's really about all I have, I think, for last thought. Oh, on Twitter, Sarcasm Stardust. I'll be there.
I would echo Misty's statements, and it's good to see you. Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
Show before.
This is always fun.
And Ray and Elizabeth are so great, and I do really appreciate that positive, stuff. I think that's really important to remember too, is that, you'll always see the truth can't be hidden. It's always going to come out. So what we're doing, is a big deal and it matters. And whereas even though, even earlier, sometimes things can be scary, it is a part of being alive. And I do think too that it's, I think that's part of the trick, is to keep people afraid. That's part of the trick, because I think more people agree than we know. They just haven't quite yet spoken out or don't quite have all the information. So I do think it's a tipping point, and I think we got a lot of good ideas tonight, especially about ways to try to be more effective, which I'm definitely always open to. You can find me at DNVFreeJA on Twitter. My DMs are open, so anybody that wants to reach out, always happy to talk to anybody. And thanks again for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Before I close out, I want to give a big shout out to the Don't Extradite Assange campaign WikiLeaks lockdown playlist, without which I probably would not have found this absolute gem from Julian Assange. He was giving a talk on self-censorship in the media, and the interviewer asked him, what is the biggest danger from the surveillance state to the individual? He said, conformity. Now, that doesn't sound like it be a problem to many people, but it's actually a serious, serious problem. For example, East Germany under the Stasi, approximately 10 people at some time in their lives provided information to them. And that provided an extremely conformist atmosphere where people learned to lie about their interests and intentions from a young age, even to themselves. That produces a society which is extremely constrained and where there's little tolerance for individual differences. And yes, that can go all the way to extreme injustice and suffering for people not towing the line, whatever that line is. I think we need to stress to the people in our lives, especially the people that we love, the dangers of conforming when we are we're falling over the precipice of complete and total totalitarianism. My name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on YouTube by typing Slow News Day Podcast into the search bar. I am also on Rockfin, Periscope, DLive, and a few other platforms soon. Huge thanks to Elizabeth Voss and Ray McGovern. That was fantastic. Mad love to Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos. Thank you, Misty. Thank you, Kendra, Andre. Love you all, and to everyone watching, we love you very, very much, and you guys just make this. Never be afraid to stand up for what is right, ever, and do it loudly. We will be back Thursday with Lissa Johnson and Elizabeth Mueller, and that is going to be tremendous as well. Until then, we'll see you soon. Good luck to us all.